The Graceland gates are a character in themselves. The stories they've seen. Leo first saw them on a grainy documentary, long before he ever set foot in Memphis. The gates of Graceland, ornate musical notes, and a pair of silhouetted figures frozen in mid-stride, forever welcoming. Even on a flickering screen, they seemed to hum with a silent story. Guardians of a legend. Now standing before them, the afternoon sun warm on his face, Leo felt a tremor. They were bigger, more imposing, more alive than he'd imagined. The metal was cool to the touch, smooth from countless hands yet etched with the passage of time. He was an art history student drawn to places that resonated with deep human emotion, and Graceland was a magnet for it. He'd come to Memphis on a whim, a solo trip, needing to feel the pulse of a place that had shaped so much cultural history. Crowds were already gathering, a steady stream of people from all corners of the globe, waiting for their turn to tour the mansion. Buses rumbled, tour guides spoke in hushed, reverent tones, and the air buzzed with excited whispers. But Leo found himself drawn away from the immediate buzz of the queue, pulling out his sketchbook. He wasn't here just for the tour. He was here to feel. He chose a spot across the street near a shade tree and began to sketch. His charcoal moved over the paper, capturing the intricate scroll work, the way the light caught the worn iron. As he drew, he found himself humming an old Elvis tune, one his grandmother used to play, "Can't Help Falling in Love." It was a simple melody, but today it felt profound. He wasn't sure how long he'd been drawing when a gentle breeze rustled the leaves above him, a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air. He looked up directly at the gates. For a split second he felt something a flicker, like an old film projector, briefly stuttering to life, showing a flash of a forgotten frame. He blinked, shaking his head. Just the heat, probably, making his imagination work overtime, but then he saw it again. A subtle shimmer, a distortion around the gates, as if the air itself was remembering something. Not a visual trick, but a feeling, a faint echo. He lowered his sketchbook, his hand still. "They've seen a lot. Those gates," a voice said beside him. An older woman, with kind eyes and a bright floral scarf, stood next to him, leaning on a cane. She had a warm smile. "Been coming here for 50 years, off and on," she continued, her voice soft with a southern lilt. "Used to stand right there, begging him for an autograph." She pointed a gnarled finger towards the very spot where the main gate stood. "You knew him?" Leo asked, his voice a little awestruck. She chuckled softly. "Oh, not personally, just as a fan, but he was good to his fans. Really good. Sometimes if he was home, he'd come out, just wave or sign a few things. You knew he saw you, that he appreciated you. Those gates, they were like the eyes of the place. You always looked to them, hoping for a glimpse." Leo looked back at the gates, a new appreciation settling over him. "They must hold so many stories," he murmured. "Oh, honey, if they could talk," the woman said, leaning closer conspiratorially. "They'd tell you tales that would make your hair stand on end, and others that would break your heart, and some that would make you laugh until your sides ached." She patted his arm. "You got a good eye, drawing them like that, capturing their spirit." She shuffled away, then joining the end of the tour line, leaving Leo alone with his thoughts and his half-finished sketch. He picked up his charcoal again, but his focus had shifted. He wasn't just drawing iron and paint anymore. He was trying to capture the unseen, the quiet hum of history that seemed to emanate from the very structure. He felt it again, stronger this time, a faint musical note, not from a speaker, but as if vibrating in the air around the gates. A different kind of music, though. Not the polished recordings, but something raw, full of youthful exuberance. He closed his eyes, focusing. Was he imagining it? Or were the gates truly whispering their tales? A flicker, a feeling of motion. The gates in his mind's eye swung open with an invisible sigh, as if inviting him not just into the mansion, but into their memories. He felt a pull, an almost irresistible urge to walk through them, not with the tour group, but alone, into the past. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that this visit to Graceland was going to be unlike any other. The gates had something to show him. They were more than just metal. They were a living, breathing archive, ready to reveal their secrets. He smiled, a sense of wonder filling him. He had found his unexpected muse, and perhaps something more. The sentinel gates stood silently, but Leo felt a distinct welcome and a promise. The next day, Leo found himself back at the gates, long before the first tour bus arrived. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of dew-kissed grass. He had barely slept, his mind buzzing with the strange connection he felt to the ironwork. He brought a fresh sketchbook and a thermos of coffee, ready to spend hours just observing. He sat on a low stone wall facing the gates and began to sketch again. This time he wasn't just drawing their form, but trying to capture the feeling they exuded. He closed his eyes, listening to the quiet of the early morning. No crowds, no cameras, just the gentle chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves. And then it began. Not a visual hallucination, but a sensation. A warmth like sunlight, radiating from the gates. A whisper of excitement, a thrilling energy that wasn't his own. He opened his eyes. The gates shimmered subtly as if seen through rising heat. Even though the morning was cool, the hum intensified, transforming into a sound, not a full song, but fragments. A fast driving beat of a drum, a raw bluesy guitar riff, and then laughter, young, clear, joyful laughter. He saw it then, not with his eyes, but in his mind, superimposed over the familiar ironwork. A sleek black Cadillac, long and gleaming, pulling up to the gates. The gates themselves, newly painted, their musical notes sparkling, and behind the wheel a young man. He couldn't see his face clearly, but the aura was unmistakable. Youthful, handsome, full of an almost reckless joy. The gates swung open, not with the slow, controlled movement of modern mechanisms, but with a swift, eager arc. And then standing just beyond them were figures. Teenagers, mostly. Girls with bright scarves tied around their hair. Boys with slicked-back pompadours. They weren't the polished, respectful tourists of today. They were wild, passionate. They screamed not in a frantic, unhinged way, but with pure, unadulterated delight. A voice surprisingly clear echoed in Leo's mind. "Elvis, Elvis, please." He saw a girl, maybe 16, with sparkling eyes and a hand pressed to her mouth, barely containing her joy. Her name was Mary. The gates, in their silent memory, showed her vibrant, alive, trembling with excitement. She was holding a crumpled paper and a stubby pencil, hoping for an autograph. The young man in the Cadillac didn't just drive through, he slowed. He rolled down the window, a flash of a smile, a quick wave, and then incredibly he reached out. Mary, emboldened, pushed forward, extending her paper. The young man took it, scribbled something quickly, and handed it back. "Thank you, honey," he said, his voice a warm, low drawl that Leo could practically hear. Mary clutched the paper to her chest, her face incandescent with happiness. She didn't faint, she didn't scream louder. She just stood there, tears welling in her eyes, a silent, reverent awe washing over her. She knew. She had connected, however briefly, with something extraordinary. Car moved on, past the gates, up the driveway, disappearing behind the trees, but the energy remained at the gates. The lingering scent of perfume, the buzzing chatter of excited voices, the feeling of a collective dream briefly fulfilled. The gates had absorbed it all. The hope, the adoration, the pure, innocent joy of early phantom. Leo felt a prickle in his own eyes. It wasn't about the celebrity, not really. It was about connection, about a young artist reaching out to his fans, and those fans feeling seen, truly seen, by the person they admired. It was a simpler time, perhaps, a time when the boundaries felt a little softer, the magic a little more tangible. The vision faded slowly, like a dissolve in an old movie. The laughter quieted, the car sounds vanished. Only the gates remained, solid and still in the morning light. But now, when Leo looked at them, he didn't just see iron. He saw Mary's beaming face, the flash of a smile from a young man who was just starting to grasp the incredible power he held. He saw the birth of a legend, witnessed by these silent sentinels. He picked up his charcoal, his hand steady. He wasn't sketching the gates anymore. He was trying to sketch the echo of Mary's joy, the electric air, the invisible energy that had once pulsed around them. The gates had not just seen stories, they had held them, preserved them, waiting for someone to listen, and Leo, he realized, was finally listening. Days turned into a week, and Leo's connection with the gates deepened. He had moved into a small rented room nearby, spending every possible moment at Graceland, observing, sketching, and most importantly, listening to the silent stories the gates seemed eager to share. He felt like an archaeologist of emotions digging into the layers of time. Today, the gates thrummed with a different energy, less raw exuberance, more sophisticated buzz. The faint sounds that resonated were no longer just rockabilly riffs, but the smoother, richer tones of 60s pop mixed with the murmur of sophisticated conversations. The shimmer around the gates was almost constant now, a rippling effect like heat rising from asphalt, but cooler, more ethereal. He closed his eyes, letting the impressions wash over him. The gates presented him with a kaleidoscope of fleeting images, like turning the pages of an old photo album too quickly. Cars, not just Cadillacs now, but sleek sports cars, elegant limousine. People, not just screaming fans, but well-dressed men and women, movie stars, musicians, business associates. He saw the gates opening wide, not for a fleeting moment, but for grand arrivals. A woman with an elegant beehive hairdo and striking eyes stepping out of a car, greeted by a flurry of activity. Priscilla, young, beautiful, and radiating a quiet strength. The gates seemed to hold a special warmth for her presence, a tenderness. He saw flashes of parties, not wild, chaotic parties, but gatherings. Musicians setting up equipment on the lawn, the scent of barbecue wafting from the back of the house, laughter echoing through the air. Gates from their vantage point were the silent welcoming committee, ushering in friends, family, and the occasional famous face. Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Nancy Sinatra. Their images flickered, ephemeral but distinct, as they passed through the ornate ironwork. One particular memory lingered. Christmas. The gates, draped in festive wreaths, and lights shimmering under a dusting of snow that rarely fell in Memphis. A small child bundled in a pink coat being lifted by strong arms to touch one of the musical notes on the gate. Lisa, Marie. Her tiny hand reached out, fingers splayed, a bright, innocent giggle filling the air. The gates seemed to echo that giggle, a pure, happy sound. He saw the king himself, more often now. Not just a glimpse, but longer impression. Sometimes Elvis would lean against the gate, smoking a cigar, looking out at the fans gathered across the street. He looked older, perhaps a little wearier than the young man who had first driven through, but his eyes still held that unmistakable warmth, that genuine connection. He'd offer a nod, a slow, easy wave, sometimes even a quick, playful wink. The fans would erupt, but it was a different kind of scream now, more respectful, more knowing. They understood his need for privacy, but still craved that simple recognition. One afternoon, a young couple dressed in their Sunday best hesitantly approached the gates. They weren't fans seeking autographs. They looked more like pilgrims. The man held a bouquet of wildflowers. He laid them gently at the base of one of the stone pillars, a silent tribute. The gates watched, absorbing the quiet reverence, the deep love that transcended fame. This was a different kind of devotion, a more personal one offered in silent gratitude. The gates seemed to soften, almost acknowledging the sincerity of their gesture. The sound shifted again, becoming more layered. The faint click of a camera shutter, the rustle of newspaper pages, the distant thrum of an airplane overhead. The world was getting faster, more demanding. The gates, once a simple barrier, were becoming a symbol. A line between the public and the private, between the myth and the man. Leo sensed a subtle change in the gates' own mood. They still held joy, but there was also a hint of something else. A deep watchfulness. A growing awareness of the scrutiny, the pressure They came with such immense fame. They had seen the laughter, the love, the grand celebrations, but they had also begun to witness the quiet moments, the escapes, the yearning for normalcy that sometimes passed through their iron embrace. As the vision faded, the constant hum around the gates softened. Leo opened his eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. He felt a profound sense of privilege, witnessing these intimate moments. The gates were not just a monument. They were a living testament to a life lived in the spotlight, and to the people who moved within its powerful orbit. He started sketching, trying to capture the feeling of those glittering, bustling years, a period when Graceland truly was the king's court, and the gates its ever-present sentinels. He knew, however, that not all stories were filled with light and laughter. The gates had seen more, much more. The next morning, Leo approached the gates with a sense of anticipation mixed with a subtle dread. He knew from his research and from the whispers he'd felt that the story held by the gates wasn't always one of joy. He sat down, a little farther back than usual, giving the gates space to breathe, to reveal what they would. The atmosphere around the gates was different today. There was no bustling energy, no grand arrivals. Instead, a deep stillness, a quiet, almost melancholic peace. The air felt heavy, saturated with a specific tender emotion. The light shimmered around the gates, but it was a soft golden glow, like early morning light filtering through stained glass. A sound emerged, distinct and clear, a child's laughter, light and airy, like wind chimes, and then a man's deeper, gentle laugh in response. The gates seemed to hum with a lullaby, a melody unseen but deeply felt. Leo closed his eyes, and the vision unfurled. Not a crowd, not a party, but a single poignant scene. The gates were open just a crack, revealing a sliver of the driveway beyond. A small figure, no older than 5 or 6, was running down the path. She was wearing a bright floral dress, her dark hair bouncing as she moved. She wasn't running away. She was running to something, her small arms outstretched. And then a large hand appeared in the frame, followed by an arm, then a shoulder. He was kneeling, his face obscured from Leo's direct view, but his posture was one of pure, unadulterated love. His arms were wide open, and Lisa Marie launched herself into them with a joyful squeal. The gates seemed to lean into this moment, guarding its intimacy. They captured the sound of Elvis's soft voice, murmuring to his daughter words of endearment. "My little girl, my angel." He swung her up into his arms, and she giggled, her tiny fingers tangling in his hair. Leo saw them walk slowly, hand in hand, toward the gates. Elvis wasn't looking at the gates or at the street beyond. His gaze was entirely on his daughter, his expression soft, unguarded. Lisa Marie, full of boundless energy, pointed at the musical notes on the gates. "Daddy, look, like our music." Elvis smiled, a genuine private smile, different from the one he showed the cameras. He reached out, tracing the outline of a note with his finger. "That's right, baby. Our music." He picked her up again, holding her so she could touch the metal herself. Her small hand pressed against the cold iron, a moment of innocent connection between child and the symbol of her father's fame. The gates seemed to hold this memory with exquisite tenderness. They registered the feeling of love, pure and unconditional, washing over them. They recalled the soft whisper of secrets exchanged between father and daughter, the quiet moments of play and shared laughter that happened just beyond the public eye. Then the mood shifted subtly. A car approached from the outside. Not a fan car, but a service vehicle. The gates opened, and Elvis, still holding Lisa Marie, stepped back, instinctively shielding her a little, his posture subtly changing from relaxed father to protective guardian. The shift was barely noticeable, but the gates in their vast memory clearly recorded it. The burden of being Elvis, even in these private moments, was always present. The vision began to fade, the little girl's laughter lingered, echoing softly. The image of a father's gentle embrace, the touch of a small hand on cold iron, remained etched in Leo's mind. The gates had witnessed the grand shows and the roaring crowds, but they had also been privy to these quiet, precious moments of ordinary love. Leo opened his eyes, a profound sense of sadness settling over him. He knew what would come later. He knew the burden Elvis carried. But for now, the gates had shown him a different truth. That amidst the dazzling chaos of fame, there was a quiet, loving heart, fully devoted to his daughter. The gates had not only seen the king, they had also seen the man. The father, vulnerable and loving, finding his deepest joy within the walls he had built for his family. And that, Leo realized, was a story as important as any performance. The gates, silent sentinels, whispered of a love that transcended the spotlights and the screams. The following days were heavier. Leo felt it in the air around the gates, a subtle tension, a different kind of hum. The bright, joyous echoes of earlier years had receded, replaced by something more complex, tinged with a weariness that permeated the very metal. The shimmer around the gates was no longer a vibrant pulse, but a slow, almost melancholic ripple. He sat on his usual wall charcoal, untouched. He just watched and waited. The gates, in their silent way, began to reveal a different chapter. The sound that emerged was a constant, low murmur. Not the excited chatter of fans, but the persistent drone of cameras, the murmur of reporters, the distant sound of engines revving, cars waiting, always waiting. The vision that appeared was a recurring one. A car approaching, the gates opening, and then a figure behind the wheel. Elvis. But he was different. Older now. His face lined, not just by age, but by something deeper. A profound fatigue. His movements were slower. His waves to the waiting crowds across the street more perfunctory, less spontaneous. He still acknowledged them, a silent nod, a slight tip of the head, because that was who he was. But the effort was visible. The gates in their memory showed him pulling away from them at all hours, late nights, early mornings. Sometimes he'd sit in his car for a moment after passing through, not moving, just staring out at the road beyond, at the world that both adored and consumed him. The gates held the feeling of his sigh, a quiet exhalation of burden. He saw the faces of the fans across the street, their devotion still fierce, unwavering. They weren't the screaming teenagers anymore. They were adults, some bringing their children, some with weathered faces that had known him since his earliest days. They stood patiently, day after day, year after year, just to be close to the gates, close to him. The gates absorbed their loyalty, their quiet vigil, understanding that this love too was a heavy thing, both a comfort and a cage. There were moments when the gates witnessed attempts at escape. Not physical escape from Graceland, but from the relentless gaze. Elvis sometimes would send out a double, a friend or cousin dressed similarly, just to draw the attention away, to buy himself a few precious minutes of peace. The gates saw the deception, and they saw the disappointment in the fans' faces when they realized, but they also registered the understanding. Even the most ardent fans knew on some level the pressure he lived under. He saw brief flashes of arguments, not loud shouting, but tense, hushed conversations between people in cars just inside the gates. The stress, the demands, the constant need for him to be Elvis took its toll on everyone around him. The gates felt the weight of unspoken words, the frustration, the sadness. One particularly vivid impression was of a rainy night. The gates gleamed slick with water. A limousine pulled up, and Elvis emerged, looking pale and drawn. He didn't wave, didn't even glance across the street. He simply walked slowly, deliberately through the open gates and disappeared into the darkness of the driveway. The gates, in their profound empathy, recorded the feeling of his loneliness, the quiet burden he carried behind the dazzling facade. They felt the rain on his face mingling with what might have been tears. The vision faded, leaving Leo with a heavy heart. The gates were not just witnesses to fame, but to its profound, often isolating cost. They had seen the joyous beginnings, the family love, the grand spectacle, but they had also seen the man in his quiet moments of struggle, yearning for a peace that his fame rarely afforded him. Leo picked up a sketchbook, but he couldn't draw. Instead, he simply rested his hand on the cool metal of the gate, He imagined all the hands that had touched it. Elvis's own countless fans, loved ones, strangers. Each touch leaving an imprint, a whisper of their story. The gates had seen a king, yes, but they had also seen a man striving to navigate an impossible existence, yearning for a quiet life that was always just beyond their reach. And in that, Leo felt a deep, profound sadness, but also an enduring respect for the man who had lived such a life behind these very gates. The air around the Graceland gates, usually buzzing with the echoes of life, was different today. It was heavy, suffocatingly still. Leo felt it. The moment he arrived, a profound sense of shared grief that hung like a shroud over the entire property. The gates, usually shimmering with energy, seemed dull, muted. Their ornate musical notes silent. Their iron figures stoic. He didn't need the gates to tell him what story was about to unfold. Every person who knew anything about Graceland knew this day, August 16, 1977. A date etched into history, a scar on the collective memory of a generation. He sat on the wall, hands resting on his knees, bracing himself. The vision came not as a gentle fade-in, but as an abrupt, shattering impact. The gates closed, unyielding, but beyond them, chaos. Not the joyful chaos of fans, but something far more primal. A single car. A siren wailing in the distance, growing louder, closer. Then another, and another. Ambulances. Police cars. Their flashing lights painted the gates in eerie, strobing colors. The feeling the gates transmitted was one of shock, a collective gasp that rippled through the very air. They saw people running towards them, faces contorted in disbelief and raw pain. Fans, reporters, neighbors, words spreading like wildfire. A devastating truth relayed in hushed, trembling tones. Then the crowds began to gather, not in neat lines for tours, but in a desperate, surging wave, thousands upon thousands. They poured in from everywhere, their faces tear-streaked, their bodies swaying with shared sorrow. They didn't knock on the gates. They simply pressed against them, their hands gripping the cold iron as if seeking solace. A last connection. The gates vibrated with the silent screams, the choked sobs, the profound, visceral grief of a world that had suddenly lost its king. He saw flowers begin to pile up at the base of the gates, thousands of them, roses, lilies, humble wildflowers. They were laid with trembling hands, each bouquet a silent farewell. Letters scrawled on whatever paper could be found were tucked into the scrollwork. Handwritten pleas of love and loss. Gifts, a teddy bear, a worn record, a faded photograph were placed reverently. The gates bore witness to this outpouring, absorbing the love and the heartbreak, becoming a wailing wall of collective sorrow. Inside the gates, glimpses of movement, somber figures dressed in black, moving with a heavy, purposeful gait, friends, family, their faces drawn, their eyes red-rimmed. The gates felt the weight of their personal grief. A private sorrow laid bare under the unforgiving glare of public tragedy. They saw the agony of Lisa Marie, a child having lost her father. They felt Priscilla's quiet, enduring pain. The world outside the gates seemed to stop turning. Time lost all meaning. Days blurred into a continuous vigil. Crowds grew spilling over the streets, occupying every inch of available space. They sang his songs, softly at first, then with more power, their voices trembling with emotion. Love me, tender. Amazing grace. Hymns and anthems sung in unison by strangers bound by a shared love. The gates resonated with every note, every chord, every whispered prayer. He saw people sleeping on the pavement, huddled under blankets, refusing to leave. They were like sentinels themselves, keeping watch, mourning alongside the gates. The gates bore witness to exhaustion, to dehydration, but also to an enduring, unbreakable spirit of devotion. The final image before the vision faded was of a hearse. A long black vehicle pulling slowly, solemnly through the gates, surrounded by hushed reverence. The gates opened, their usual flourish replaced by a grave, deliberate slowness. They received the hearse, then closed again, enclosing the profound sorrow within the sacred ground of Graceland. Leo opened his eyes, tears streaming down his face. his chest tight with shared grief. He hadn't been alive then, but the gates had made him feel it, truly feel it. The sheer, overwhelming impact of that day. The gates were not just silent observers, they were the first witnesses to a worldwide mourning. They had taken on the immense burden of grief, holding it, preserving it in their very iron. They were the threshold between life and death, between a presence and an eternal legacy. And now, Leo understood. They were ready to show him how that legacy would endure. The air around the gates today felt different yet again. Crushing sorrow of the previous day's vision had receded, replaced by a profound quiet, a sense of lingering sadness. Yes, but also a new feeling. That of resolute guardianship. The gates seemed to stand taller, stronger, as if accepting a solemn new duty. Leo arrived early as always, but he didn't sketch. He simply sat observing the stillness. The gates, in their shared memory, began to replay the quiet, transitional years immediately following August 1977. The initial chaos had died down, replaced by a steady stream of mourners. Not the thousands that had converged on that fateful day, but a constant trickle. People still came drawn by an invisible pull, leaving flowers, cards, and quiet tributes at the gates. The gates held the echo of countless whispered prayers, tears that had long since dried on the iron, an enduring sense of loss. They were no longer just the entrance to a famous home. They were a shrine, a memorial. The gates showed glimpses of the mansion's interior life, a life without its vibrant center, the windows, often lit. And bustling, the gates registered the loneliness, the quiet grief of the family and staff who remained. They saw Priscilla moving with purpose, her strength evident even in profound sorrow. They saw Lisa Marie growing up behind their protective embrace, shielded from the public gaze, yet ever aware of the legacy that surrounded her. The constant concern carried by the gates was the future of Graceland. There were hushed conversations, relayed through the gates' memory, about finances, about upkeep, about how to preserve a legacy that was both intensely personal and globally significant. The gates heard the worry, the determination, the love that fueled these discussions. They witnessed the family's steadfast commitment to protecting Elvis's home, his sanctuary. Then a new energy began to hum, not the celebrity buzz of old, but something more pragmatic yet equally important. The gates witnessed men in suits, not music producers, but architects, engineers, business people. They heard the clinking of keys, the rustle of blueprints. The discussions once about the King's next tour were now about opening Graceland to the public. The gates felt the hesitation, the immense responsibility that came with such a decision. They recalled the initial resistance, the desire for privacy, for Graceland to remain a family home. But they also sensed the growing understanding that the house belonged in a way to the world, that its stories needed to be shared, its history preserved, not just for the family, but for the millions who loved Elvis. They saw the preparation, careful, respectful process of transforming a private home into a public museum, placement of velvet ropes, the meticulous labeling of artifacts, the designing of a tour route that honored the memory while managing the flow of visitors. The gates absorbed the dedication of the people, involved their painstaking efforts to create an experience that would be both authentic and reverent. The greatest shift in the gates' awareness was the sense of a new purpose. They were no longer just the entry point to a private residence or a barrier to an inner sanctum. They were becoming the welcoming arms of a sacred site, a place where fans could connect, truly connect with the king they adored. The vision faded, leaving Leo with a profound sense of the gates' unwavering loyalty. They had not just witnessed the grief. They had been an active participant in the preservation of the legacy. They had stood firm guarding the memories, holding the space, until the time was right for Graceland to open its doors to the world. They had been the silent, steadfast guardians, bearing witness to a family's grief, a public's devotion, and the quiet, determined effort to ensure that the spirit of Elvis Presley would live on, not just in music, but in the very fabric of his beloved home. Leo knew that the story of the gates was far from over. In fact, a new chapter was about to begin. The air around the gates today was charged with a different kind of energy. It was no longer sorrow nor quiet guardianship. It was anticipation, a hum of excitement that felt like a coiled spring ready to release. The gates themselves seemed to vibrate with a renewed purpose, their musical notes almost twinkling in the morning sun. Leo felt it in his bones. This was the moment, the opening, the day Graceland would officially welcome the world. The gates in their shared memory began to swell with images and sounds from that pivotal day. The sound of camera flashes, far more intense than before. The excited chatter of reporters, not just from local news but from national and international outlets. A sense of history unfolding, witnessed by these very gates. He saw the red ribbon stretched across the main entrance of the gates, taut and symbolic. Dignitaries, members of the Presley family, standing beside it, their faces a mixture of solemnity and quiet pride. Priscilla, elegant and composed, holding the large ceremonial scissors. The gates felt the weight of that moment, the culmination of years of planning, of hope, of love. And then, the snip, the ribbon fell, and the gates slowly, majestically began to swing open. Not just a crack for a private car, but wide, welcoming, a full embrace, and through them poured the first puppet visitors. Leo saw them, an endless stream of faces. Their expressions were a mixture of awe, reverence, and disbelief. These weren't just fans, they were pilgrims. They walked slowly, almost reverently, touching the gates as they passed, their fingers tracing the familiar musical notes and figures. The gates absorbed the quiet whispers of, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm here. Thank you, Elvis." He saw an elderly woman, her eyes brimming with tears, reach out and kiss one of the iron notes. The gates felt the warmth of her lips, the profound emotion of a lifetime of devotion. A young man, barely out of his teens, wearing an Elvis t-shirt, stood for a long moment just inside the gates, looking up the driveway as if expecting the king himself to appear. The gates understood his hope, his yearning. The sounds were incredible. Not just the human voices, but the distant rumble of the first tour bus pulling up the driveway, its speakers playing a classic Elvis tune. The gates vibrated with the music, truly alive with it now. They saw the tour guides, eager and respectful, leading the groups, sharing the stories. They felt the collective gasp as visitors entered the mansion itself, the hushed reverence that fell over the crowds as they walked through the king's private spaces. The gates became a threshold to a different kind of experience. No longer just a barrier, but a portal. A gateway to memory, to legacy, to a feeling that was uniquely Elvis. They saw people from every corner of the world, families with children, couples holding hands, solo travelers on a journey of discovery. Each person brought their own story, their own connection to the music, to the legend. The gates witnessed tears, not of sorrow now, but of overwhelming joy, of nostalgia, of finally being in the place they had dreamed of. They saw laughter, shared anecdotes, moments of shared musical appreciation. They absorbed the light of countless camera flashes, documenting the beginning of a new era. As the vision began to fade, Leo felt a wave of profound gratitude. The gates had shown him the birth of a phenomenon, the depth of a family's love, the burden of fame, the heartbreak of loss, and now the triumph of legacy. They had witnessed the transformation of a private home into a public monument, a testament to an enduring star. He opened his eyes, the afternoon sun warm on his face. The gates stood before him, solid and timeless, yet pulsing with an unseen energy. They had not just opened for the tours, they had opened for the world. And in doing so, they had ensured that the music, the love, the spirit of Elvis Presley would continue to echo through their iron heart for generations to come. Leo knew his journey with the gates was leading him somewhere beautiful, a deeper understanding of love and legacy. Days turned into more days, and Leo found himself observing the modern-day flow of visitors through the gates. The initial rush of the opening had settled into a steady, continuous stream. The gates, in their quiet way, continued to share their stories, but now the emphasis was on endurance, on the unfolding narrative of time. The aura around the gates felt constant now, a deep, pervasive warmth that spoke of countless shared moments. The shimmering was no longer fleeting. It was a permanent, gentle haze, like heat rising from the ground on a long summer day, softening the edges of the present and blurring them with the past. The sounds that resonated were a medley of languages, accents from around the globe. He heard Japanese, German, Spanish, French, all mingled with the distinct American drawls of Memphis. The gates had truly become a global meeting point, a place where the universal language of music transcended all barriers. He saw the faces of the fans. They were different now in many ways from the screaming teenagers or the grieving mourners. He saw grandparents, their eyes still holding the spark of youthful adoration, bringing their grandchildren to Graceland. The gates showed him these multi-generational visits, filled with quiet teaching moments. A grandmother, pointing to a musical note on the gate, explaining, "That's how he made us feel, sweetie, like music." A grandfather sharing a faded memory of seeing Elvis on television or hearing his first record. The gates felt the passage of time in these new hands that touched them. They were younger hands, sometimes hesitant, sometimes filled with a curiosity that was not memory-based, but a new discovery. Children, pointing at the Elvis statue, asking their parents, "Is he really a king?" The gates sensed the innocence, the beginning of a new connection. He saw the traditions that had formed over the years. Fans leaving messages on the gates with permanent markers, their heartfelt words scrawled across the iron. "Thank you, Elvis. Your music lives on. We miss you." The gates bore the weight of these words, a constant evolving tapestry of devotion. They watched as groundskeepers periodically cleaned the gates only for new messages. To reappear within days, it was a testament to unending love. He saw new kinds of tributes. Musical performances outside the gates, guitars strumming, voices singing not just Elvis songs but original tunes, inspired by his legacy. Dancers in sequin jumpsuits performing for small, appreciative crowds. The gates felt the vibrant energy of these ongoing tributes, the way his music continued to inspire creativity and joy. Leo saw couples, some young, some older, holding hands as they approached the gates, their presence a silent acknowledgement of the romance and passion Elvis had brought to so many lives. The gates recognized the enduring power of love, both personal and universal, that was intricately woven into the fabric of Graceland. He saw solitary figures, too, people who came alone, sometimes sitting for hours just like him, gazing at the gates. They were processing their own histories, their own connections to Elvis, finding a quiet comfort in the shared space. The gates understood their silent pilgrimages, their need for a sacred moment of remembrance and reflection. The gates in their long, silent vigil were no longer just holding memories of a man. They were holding the memories of millions. They had become a repository of collective emotion, joy, grief, love, admiration, nostalgia, and hope. They were a living, breathing testament to the power of one person to touch the lives of so many, across generations, across cultures. As the day waned and the light around the gates softened to a golden hue, Leo felt a profound sense of peace. He had come to Memphis seeking history, and he had found it not in dusty books, but in the vibrant living heart of Graceland. The gates had shared their profound stories, stories of a life lived, a legacy forged, and a love that continued to bloom. He knew, with an unshakable certainty, that the gates were not just a part of Graceland. They were its very soul, silently connecting the past, the present, and the future. Leo found himself at the Graceland gates one last time. His trip was nearing its end, and a bittersweet ache settled in his chest. He wouldn't be able to spend every day here, listening, feeling, but he knew with a certainty that had grown from his unique connection that the gates would remain, and their stories would continue. The air around them today felt different again, not a specific memory, but a culmination. A deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath them. The shimmer around the gates was no longer a vision of the past, but a continuous, gentle glow, as if the gates themselves were breathing. He sat on the wall, not sketching, not waiting for a specific scene, but simply being with them. Closed his eyes, and instead of images, he felt pure emotion. He felt the initial burst of youthful energy, the raw excitement of a young man with a dream pulling up to his new home. The gates vibrated with that hopeful, vibrant beginning. He felt the warmth of family love, the tender embraces, the private giggles of a father and daughter, shielded by their protective embrace. The gates resonated with the deep, unconditional bond that had formed within their view. He felt the dazzling, sometimes overwhelming pressure of fame. Constant gaze, the relentless demands, the quiet moments of weariness. The gates bore the weight of that immense spotlight, understanding the silent burden. He felt the shattering grief of loss, the collective wail of a world in mourning, the endless tributes laid at their feet. The gates absorbed the tears, the prayers, the profound sorrow that had washed over them. And then he felt the resurgence, the steadfast determination to preserve a legacy. Careful, loving transformation of a home into a monument. The gates radiated with this new purpose, becoming a beacon for millions. Finally, he felt the continuous living pulse of today. The multi-generational love, the global pilgrimages, the endless stream of new faces discovering Elvis for the first time. The gates hummed with the enduring power of music, of connection, of shared human experience. He opened his eyes. The gates stood before him, solid, ancient, yet vibrantly alive. They weren't just metal and paint. They were a living archive, a silent sentinel, a collective heart that had absorbed decades of human emotion. They had seen more joy, more sorrow, more adoration, more private moments than any other inanimate object he could imagine. The old woman he'd met on his first day, the one who had talked about the gates telling tales. She had been right. If they could talk, they would speak volumes, but they didn't need to. They communicated through feeling, through resonance, through the stories they allowed the receptive heart to hear. Leo stood up, walking slowly towards the gates. He reached out, not to sketch, but to simply touch. His fingers traced the cold, smooth iron, feeling the faint vibrations. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the stories, but for the unexpected connection he had found here. He had come as an art history student seeking to understand a cultural phenomenon. He was leaving as something more touched by the unseen heartbeat of a place. He looked up at the musical notes, the iconic silhouettes. They weren't just decorative. They were symbols of the enduring rhythm of life. The highs and lows, the crescendos and decrescendos, all played out behind these very gates. He smiled. A quiet, knowing smile. Graceland wasn't just a mansion. It was a home with an eternal spirit, guarded by the most remarkable, soulful gates. They had witnessed everything, held everything. And through them, the loves and the legacy of Elvis Presley would continue to resonate, forever echoing in the air, a heartwarming symphony for all who truly listened. Leo knew he would carry this feeling with him, a whisper from the sentinel gates forever.